Well, welcome to our Extra with Life Point podcast. We're so glad that you are listening with us, and we're joined here by Dave Nelson, senior pastor at Timberlake Church.
What's up, guys?
How's it going, Dave?
Hey, great day.
Yeah.
It's raining. It's predictable.
Yeah.
And New Year.
Yep. How was your Christmas?
Christmas for my family and I was great. All of my extended family, my parents, everybody like that lives back in Wisconsin. And so living here in the state of Washington, did not get to hang out with them, but I'm going to do it this week. So we have a late Christmas this year with the family.
Oh, nice. So you're going to fly out, hang out with them?
But with my wife, my kids, we did celebrate in Washington, and that was fun.
Oh, awesome. So we're starting a new sermon series called Start Fresh that you preached on today. And it's all about the ability to change and just focusing on that with 2025, new year. And so I had a couple questions here I want to go through, just give our podcast listeners a little bit extra from your sermon. And so the first question here, you talked about crisis-driven change. So what advice would you give someone who feels overwhelmed by sudden crisis-driven change, like the loss of a loved one or a major life disruption? So any advice for that? And also maybe just categorize what is crisis-driven change.
All right, so crisis change is when a sudden event forces change on you. And it is a crisis. Mm-hmm. So I would say anybody who is experiencing crisis change is going to be overwhelmed. Just the very nature of a crisis, whether it's a financial crisis or it is a crisis in your marriage or crisis with some sort of addiction, I think just naturally we are going to be overwhelmed. And the thing about really any type of change, but I'm going to hit crisis change, you can't prepare for crisis while it's happening, right? You have to prepare for it ahead of time. It's like, if I'm going through the pass, going through the mountains, and I'm in a remote area, and all of a sudden I lose cell phone service, and I get a flat tire, but I don't have a spare tire with me, and I don't have tools to change anything, and I don't have emergency supplies, I'm in trouble.
Yep.
So I will say, if we are not prepared at some level with a faith that is solid, with a community of friends to support us, it is going to be a challenging time, but that doesn't mean that God won't extend his grace to us. And so I do think that when we find ourselves in crisis, if we've not developed a support group, which if we have developed it, let's use them.
Yeah.
But if we've not really developed that, I think it's a great opportunity to pray and to say, God, I maybe haven't done everything I'm supposed to do to prepare for this, but I'm now going to do my best to reach out for help, to get into some sort of support group, right?
Yeah.
If it's a crisis in your marriage, why not see a marriage counselor?
Yeah.
If it's a crisis financially, why not talk to someone who's actually good with finances?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it is good. And, for maybe somebody that didn't grow up going to church, the whole idea of having a community or a tribe might be even like foreign to them as like an idea of like, oh, this is available to you when you like go to church and you can sign up and be a part of a small group. And the benefits of it are huge. To be able to have those people. Yeah.
I love this because you're right. It's so ingrained in me.
Yep.
In fact, the church I started in Wisconsin, I had a friend for 15 years, just lost him to a stroke. It's just crazy event. But literally when I got done speaking, I had a text from one of the guys in his group that's been meeting for 15 years. They literally meet all the time. And he says, hey, this guy served on the parking team. He said, everybody in our group has decided who's not on a volunteer team that they are going to serve on the parking team in his place. So we're all going to take turns, and in his place, we're all going to, but you don't find that in most areas of life.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
And he says, our group has been making meals for his widow.
Wow.
And our group has been doing that, but all of that is intentional.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. Next question here. So you talked about trade-offs, and in your experience, what's the best way to approach trade-offs that come with following Jesus, especially when they feel challenging or even uncomfortable?
Okay, so I would argue that following Jesus will always feel uncomfortable if you're truly taking steps forward.
Yeah.
But most of us just gravitate towards, I'm doing what I want to do.
Yep.
Right? Because he's going to ask us to forgive the people who hurt us. That's going to be uncomfortable.
Yep.
He tells us to not just love our friends, but to try to figure out a way to love our enemies.
Yep.
He calls us to live generously and open-handed. So I think everything in our life that Jesus calls us to and wants to chisel away at our heart, making us more like him, is going to be challenging. Mm-hmm. And I'm convinced the only way that we're going to do it long-term is exactly what we just got done talking about. We have to develop a community of people around us.
Yeah.
Because if I have a community of people around me, then all of a sudden I'm no longer showing up to church gatherings. They're going to call me out on it.
Yep.
If they see me treating my wife in a disrespectful way, they're going to call me out on it.
Yep.
That doesn't happen by someone who barely knows me.
Yep.
It's got to happen by long-term friendships.
Yep. That's great. And then the last question here, how can we intentionally use seasons of change as opportunities for personal or spiritual growth instead of avoiding them? I think that's something that we all do kind of naturally, is we try to avoid these seasons.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Even if we initiated the change, then it gets difficult. And we're like, now we're trying to avoid all the things I need to do to want to be a different person. There's two things really for me that stand out when you ask that question. The first is, it really does give us an opportunity to reevaluate our priorities and restructure them. Even if it was forced on us. So let's say I'm going through a difficult time in my marriage. It gives me an opportunity to reprioritize some things so my marriage becomes a higher priority, or time with my kids becomes a higher priority. Or if it's something I initiate, it's something with, I'm going to spend less time on social media. It gives me an opportunity to, even when it's difficult, to just say, okay, I'm going to get this off my phone, or I'm going to do something. But it really does help us to prioritize. But for me personally, when I've gone through difficult times in seasons of change, I have a regular, I know it sounds kind of weird. It's not something natural necessarily, but I have focused myself on people that have gone through change and how it shaped them in a positive way. Yeah. So back in 2017, the church I was pastoring felt like it was falling apart. We had lost a lease. I talk about this in the message from this weekend. And bottom line is, in the midst of all those changes, I had to look and read stories of people who've gone through incredible, difficult changes as pastors in the church and how they made it through.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many stories there are out there of churches that have gone through incredibly difficult times but made it through on the other end. And so that kept me motivated. It kept saying, all right, there is something better at the end of this.
Yeah. And I think that also, that just speaks to our story. Because I think that when you go through maybe something like a crisis or whatever, you almost try to forget it. Other people see it and it makes them uncomfortable and they want to look away. But what you're kind of talking about is there's lessons in those crisis moments. Yeah, that's awesome. So as we're wrapping this up and, it's the beginning of 2025, is there anything that maybe after, somebody listens to this sermon, or maybe they were here Sunday morning, that you would just want to just encourage them as they're beginning their 2025 year?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with when we look ahead, and I'm going to talk about not the crisis change, but the visionary change, the change that we want in our life. I want to be different in this area. I want to improve in this area. I want my character to grow, whatever it is. I've said this multiple times already. For us to do it alone, I think is a losing battle. There is something about doing it with others, right? It's not easy for me to want to go out and just hike by myself. I actually do maybe once every other week. But when someone calls me up and said, dude, let's go hiking, now all of a sudden I'm motivated.
Yep.
Now all of a sudden I'm doing it. So I would say whether it's getting in a group, it might not even be based on whatever it is you need to change. It might be a support group outside of the church. It might be a very intentional time, a meeting just with one other person over a specific issue. But I can't imagine doing life alone. And I say that from my own self, having surrounded myself with so many people. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, definitely live life with people. It's so important. Thank you, Dave, for joining us on this episode.
Absolutely.
We're so glad to have you today. And
Thank you.
Yeah. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our Extra with LifePoint episodes.